Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, Pyareo. This commentary is a continuation of our previous one that attempted to explain the position of logic within Sikh spirituality. The primary question remains the same, namely whether logic and reason have a place in Sikhi in general and in Gurbani in particular. So this is part 2. It would be easier to follow if you have already listened to part 1. Now, one verse from Gurbani has since been put forward for discussion to suggest that logic and reason have actually been negated or rejected within Gurbani. So, this commentary will examine this verse to see if indeed logic is contradictory to Gurbani. The verse is Socha Sochana Hovai Je Sochi Lakhvar. This verse, as we know, is the first verse of the first body of Japabani, which appears on page 1 of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And it has been translated as follows: by thinking, he cannot be reduced to thought, even by thinking hundreds of thousands of times. So the suggestion is that if thinking is being negated in Gurbani, then it follows that logic and reason are also being negated. This is because logic, reason, argument, and persuasion are all derived from the thinking process. Now, the first question to ask is if indeed this is the correct meaning of the verse Socha Sochana Hovai Je Sochi Lakhwar. Pyareo, there are many Gurbani verses that are wrongly translated into English, and then there are many verses that are wrongly pronounced even in Punjabi. And if there is one verse that has suffered from both of these defects, namely wrongly pronounced and wrongly translated, then this is the verse indeed. Now the verse as written by Guru Nanak Ji is Socha Sochna Hovai Je Sochi Lakhwar. But very often it is read as Sochiyan Sochna Hovai. It is not Sochiyan Sochna Hovai, it is Socha Sochna Hovai. So this is where the misconception originates, because sochiya is thinking. Sochiya means sochan de naal, sochan de rahi, by thinking. But the word is not sochiya, it is soch. And soch is something else altogether. So what exactly is the meaning of soch? I think once we find the meaning of soch, we will then be able to figure out what Guru Nanak Ji truly means by the verse Socha Sochana Hovai. When wanting to determine the meaning of concepts and words in Gurbani, the basic principle is to look for the meanings from within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji itself. So this is a foundational principle that Gurbani explains Gurbani. In Punjabi we say, Gurbani de arth, Gurbani rahi karne. Now, the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji is a monumental text of 1430 pages. Every word and every concept that is used in Bani by the Gurus and the Bhagats is explained. It's given its definitions and then provided its meanings. We only have to look for it within the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So on page 495 of the Guru Granth Sahib, we have under Gujri Mahalla Panjma this slok: At sat majjan kar isnana, param aaye tar sari, anak soch, kare din rati, bin satgur andhyari. At sat is 68. At is 8 and sat 60. So you add them together, it becomes 68. At sat tiraths. Therefore, it refers to the 68 tiraths or the 68 places of pilgrimage. So if one takes cleansing baths, Majjan and Ishnana, at sat tirth kar Ishnana. If one takes cleansing baths at the 68 sacred shrines of pilgrimage, and the next verse is Anik Soj Kare Din Rati, and therefore performs physical cleansing and washing day and night. So it is clear that the meaning of the word Soj in Guru Granth Sahib Ji refers to physical cleansing. It refers to the taking of baths at pilgrimages, etc. So in the verse we began with, Socha Sochana Hovai Je Sochi Lakhwar, Soch refers to physical cleansing. It does not refer to thinking. Furthermore, Pyareo, the words Lakhwar in the same verse, Je Sochi Lakhwar, helps us to confirm the meaning. Now, Lakhwar means 100,000 times. So it is referring to a quantifiable activity. it is referring to actions that can be counted in numbers. Baths at pilgrimages can be counted. Thinking cannot be counted. The act of cleansing is measured in how many times one does it. Thinking, however, is measured in how deeply one contemplates or how long one contemplates. Lakhwar cannot apply to thinking. So, Pyaryo, the true meaning of the verse Socha Sochna Hovai Je Sochi Lakhwar is, were one to physically cleanse oneself even 100,000 times, the cleansing of the mind does not come about. So it is clear, Socha Sochna Hovai does not refer to thinking. And thinking is never negated in Gurbani. In fact, on page 1245 of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, we have these verses of Guru Nanak Padsha Ji. He says, Akali Sahib Seviye, Akali Paye Man, Akali Padke Bujye, Akali Kiche Dan, Nanak Akhe Rah Hor Gallan Shaitan. Now, Akal means intellect. It means the thinking process. So, Guruji uses the word Akali repeatedly here, 4 times exactly here, to tell us to use our thinking while undertaking spiritual and religious activities, such as remembering him. Akali Sahib Savior. Savior means to remember him. Then he says, use your intellect to understand and know him. Akali Padke Pujiya, etc. Guruji even declares, Nanak Akhe Rah This is the real spirituality, one that engages, uses, and deploys the intellect and thinking ability given to us by God. And then he says, Hor Gallan Shaitan. To say something else, to say the reverse, is to take mankind away from God. So in conclusion, this verse, Socha Sochna Hovai, Je Sochi Lakhwar, is not about thinking. It is therefore never a critique of logic and not a critique of reason. Now, I would like to reiterate that logic and reason are firmly grounded within Sikhi and that Gurbani is deeply anchored within foundations of logic and reason. The entire Japbani is in fact a reasoned and logical argument. Such is the logic of Japbani, Pyaryo, that Guru Nanak begins by outlining the problem that needs fixing. As they say, why fix something that's not broken? So Guru Nanak Ji begins by telling us in the first body what is broken, what needs fixing in the spiritual sense. Yeah? In scientific research, we call it the statement of the problem. What is the problem that needs a solution? The problem is that human beings are doing lots of things and they think these things are spiritual and that they will take them to God, but they are not and that they will not. So what are they doing wrong? This is body 1 in essence. Yeah? Guru Nanak defines the problem in 4 verses. The first verse is Socha Sochna Hovai Je Sochi Lakhwar. There is a huge population of people who believe that the way to God is to cleanse themselves. So that is what they do, cleansing themselves, washing at holy rivers, dipping at holy lakes, bathing at places of pilgrimage, temple pools, etc., etc. Guru Nanak says cleansing of the mind can never come about even if one takes baths 100,000 of times. Then he says in the second verse, Chuppa Chapana Hovai Je Lai Raha Livtar. Then there were an equal number of people who thought sitting and meditating in some corner of the earth would take them to God. And Guru Nanak says one could meditate as deep and focus as much as one wants to the extent of levtar, meaning becoming one with your own conscience. But inner silence or silence of the mind would still not take place. Then Guru Nanak Padsha says in the third verse, Pukya Pukna Uttari Je Banna Puriya Par. There were large numbers of people who believed that fulfilling their physical desires first would free them with time, energy, and opportunity to devote to God later on. So they had plans. First 25 years grow up. The next 25 years accumulate wealth, children, family, etc. Get fulfilled, get satiated. And then the final 25 years, find God. Guru Nanak Ji says human desires never get filled even if one accumulates mountain loads of all that one desires. And then in the next verse, he says, Sahas Syanapa lakh ho hai, ta ik na chale naal. Then there were those who figured that the way to God was through their cleverness. So they cooked up all sorts of clever methods, calculated ways to reach God. coming up with long lists of what to do, what conditions to do them, when to do them, under whose guidance to do them, what not to do, etc. etc. These were people of measured sadhanas, of fixed asanas, and specific mantras to go to God. Guru Nanak Ji says none of these clever methods, even if they number in the hundreds of thousands, will work. Challa and all means will work. So there was the problem, Pyareo, stated exhaustively in 4 verses about spiritual people adopting the 4 foundational ways to God, albeit wrong ways. Number 1, physical cleansing, socha soch. Number 2, meditating, chupa chup. Thirdly, fulfilling physical desires first and then turning to spirituality, pukya poka, and then using all sorts of methods, but none of them reaching God. Now, after the statement of the problem, Guru Nanak Ji puts forth the primary question, the foundational issue, the basic concern, the crucial matter, and that is, kev sachiara hoye, kev kura tutta pal. How then, if not through the above mentioned problematic ways, how then does one become sachiara? Sachiara means a God realized being. Pyareo, the Sri Guru Granth Sahib never ever asks a question and then leaves it at that. The answer is always provided immediately, most often in the same verse or sometimes immediately in the next one. So here Guru Nanak Padsha immediately provides the summary answer to the question, Kev Sachiara Hoya, which is Hukum na jain chalana, Nanak likhya naal. So the way, according to Guru Nanak, is to abide by his hukum and raza, to chalana or to flow along in this hukum and raza. Such is the logic, and such is the reasoning, such is the structure and the order of this beautifully arranged and organized Bani called Jap Bani of Guru Nanak. And then after outlining the problem, in the next body, Guruji explains the hukum. Then he talks about the method, which involves Gaviya, Padi 3, Suniya, 4 Padis 7 to 10, and Maniya, 4 Padis again 11 to 14. Then he talks about Parvan being accepted, Panch Parvan in Padi 15. Then he goes on to talk about the immenseness and vastness of God, the Asank Padis, the Amul Padis, right up till Padi 25. Then he talks about the operationalization of Hukum in Sodardi Padi, which is Padi 26. Then he talks about the 4 stages, what we call the Khandas here, the Dharma Khanda, the Gyan Khanda, Saram Khanda, all the way right up to Sach Khanda till Padi 38. And finally to his slok about reaching God, about realizing God, Nanak te mukh ujale. Mukh ujale are those who are realized and those who are connected to God. And then this sloks connects to slok number 1, which describes God that we want to realize. Aaj sacha, Jugan sacha, happy such, Nanak hosi pi such. So we see, Pyareo, this is the spiritual genius of Guru Nanak Ji. In this spiritual brilliance, there is structure, there is order, there is flow, there is arrangement, from body to body. In Guru Nanak's spiritual wisdom and in his godly genius, there is persuasion, powerful persuasion. There is reasoning, solid reasoning, reasoning that is unassailable and unshakable. And in Guru Nanak Ji's spiritual brilliance and godly genius, there is logic, a logic that is so powerful and so commanding that it uproots completely blind faith, it shreds meaningless rituals and demolishes religious activities that do not lead to God. Most importantly, Guru Nanak's use of logic, reason, intellect, and persuasive argument within his spirituality places Sikhi at the epicenter of modern spirituality, a spirituality meant for the thinking and the discerning spiritual seeker, a spirituality fit for the 21st century and beyond. ਭੁੱਲ ਚੁੱਕ ਦੀ ਖਿਮਾ ਕਰਨੀ ਪਿਆਰਿਓ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।